the day Bumpy Johnson made the president resign in 24 hours. The resignation letter was already written when President Lyndon B. Johnson's phone rang at 3:33 a.m. On March 31, 1968, LBJ had spent the night pacing the Oval Office, knowing that in 18 hours he would announce to the nation that he would not seek re-election. What he didn't know was that the man calling him at this ungodly hour had orchestrated every event that led to this moment. "Mr. President," Bumpy Johnson said quietly, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." LBJ's hands trembled as he gripped the phone. In the next 24 hours, America would watch a president fall from power, never knowing that the most dangerous man in Harlem had just collected on a debt that went back 7 years. But this story doesn't start with phone calls or resignations. It starts with a photograph that should never have existed and a secret that could have destroyed America. November 22, 1963, Dallas, Texas. 12:30 p.m., President John F. Kennedy's motorcade turned onto Dealey Plaza, and 3 shots rang out that changed history forever. But what the Warren Commission never discovered, what the FBI never investigated, was the 4th shot that misdan the man who fired it. That man was Thomas "Tommy" Gunn Rodriguez, one of Bumpy Johnson's most trusted associates. Rodriguez hadn't been sent to Dallas to kill President Kennedy. He'd been sent to protect him, because 48 hours before the assassination, Bumpy Johnson had received intelligence that changed everything he thought he knew about American power. The information came from an unexpected source, a terrified telephone operator named Dorothy Williams, who worked the overnight shift at the White House Communications Center. Dorothy was also the sister of Marcus Williams, who ran numbers for Bumpy in East Harlem. On November 20th, 1963, Dorothy overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "The Chicago thing is confirmed," one voice had said. "Friday at 12:30, make sure Johnson knows he'll be president by dinner." Dorothy didn't understand the full meaning, but she understood enough to know that something terrible was going to happen to President Kennedy, and that Vice President Johnson was somehow involved. She called her brother, Marcus, who immediately called Bumpy. Bumpy Johnson had met John F. Kennedy twice, once during the 1960 election campaign when Kennedy needed black votes in Harlem, and once in 1962 during a secret meeting about organized crime. Kennedy was young, idealistic, and genuinely committed to civil rights. More importantly, Kennedy had kept his promises to the black community. Lyndon Johnson was different. He was a politician who saw civil rights as a political calculation rather than a moral imperative. If Kennedy died and Johnson became president, the progress that black Americans had fought for could be reversed overnight. So Bumpy made a decision that would define the next 5 years of American history. He would try to save Kennedy's life. And if he failed, he would make sure Johnson paid for his complicity. Tommy Rodriguez arrived in Dallas on November 21st with orders to position himself where he could provide additional security for Kennedy's motorcade. Rodriguez was a former Army sniper who had served in Korea, and his job was to watch for threats that the Secret Service might miss. At 12:30 p.m. on November 22nd, Rodriguez was positioned on the 6th floor of the Daltex building, diagonal from the Texas School Book Depository. Through his rifle scope, he had a clear view of the presidential limousine as it turned onto Dealey Plaza. He saw Lee Harvey Oswald in the book depository window. He saw the glint of a second rifle from behind the grassy knoll. And when the first shot rang out, Rodriguez but at Oswald. Rodriguez's bullet shattered the window frame 6 inches from Oswald's head, disrupting his aim and causing Oswald's second shot to go wide. But there were other shooters, other angles, other bullets that Rodriguez couldn't stop. President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. at Parkland Hospital. Lyndon Johnson was sworn in as the 36th president at 2:38 p.m. aboard Air Force One, and Tommy Rodriguez disappeared into the chaos of Dallas, carrying with him the one piece of evidence that would eventually bring down the man who had just become the most powerful person in the world. The evidence was a photograph taken by Rodriguez's camera, which had been modified to automatically capture images while he aimed his rifle. The photograph showed Lyndon Johnson checking his watch at 12:29 p.m. 1 minute before the shooting started, with an expression of anticipation rather than concern. It was the face of a man waiting for something he knew was about to happen. Rodriguez returned to New York on November 24th, 2 days after Oswald was killed by Jack Ruby. He handed the photograph to Bumpy Johnson, along with a detailed report of everything he had observed in Dallas. LBJ knew, Rodriguez said simply. He was checking his watch like he had an appointment. Bumpy studied the photograph for a long time. The image quality was grainy, but Johnson's expression was unmistakable. This wasn't the face of a man suddenly thrust into power by tragedy. This was the face of a man whose carefully laid plans were finally coming to fruition. "What do you want to do with this?" Rodriguez asked. "Nothing," Bumpy said. "Not yet. But someday, when Johnson thinks he's untouchable, we're going to remind him that nobody is above justice." That day came 5 years later, when President Johnson's policies had devastated the black community, when the Vietnam War had spiraled out of control, and when Johnson's approval ratings had fallen so low that even his own party was turning against him. March 30th, 1968, Johnson was preparing to announce his candidacy for re-election when Bumpy decided it was time to collect on the debt that Johnson didn't even know he owed. The approach was elegant in its simplicity. Bumpy didn't threaten Johnson directly or demand money or favors. Instead, he arranged for certain information to reach certain people who would know exactly what to do with it. The first person to receive the Rodriguez photograph was Senator Robert Kennedy, who had been struggling with whether to challenge Johnson for the Democratic nomination. The photograph, delivered through intermediaries and accompanied by detailed documentation of Rodriguez's Dallas observations, convinced Kennedy that Johnson was complicit in his brother's assassination. Kennedy announced his candidacy for president on March 16, 1968. The second person to receive the information was journalist Seymour Hersh, who had been investigating rumors of government conspiracies for years. Hersh couldn't publish the photograph without corroborating evidence, but it confirmed suspicions he'd harbored since Dallas. Hersh began making phone calls to sources inside the Secret Service, the FBI, and the Dallas Police Department. Word spread quickly through Washington's intelligence community that someone had evidence linking Johnson to the Kennedy assassination. The third person to receive the information was Clark Clifford, Johnson's Secretary of Defense, who had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with the president's conduct of the Vietnam War. The photograph, combined with other evidence of Johnson's political ruthlessness, convinced Clifford that the president was a danger to American democracy. Clifford began quietly organizing opposition to Johnson within the administration itself. By March 30th, Johnson was facing challenges from three directions. Robert Kennedy's candidacy had energized anti-war democrats. Investigative journalists were asking dangerous questions about Dallas, and his own cabinet members were undermining his authority. That's when Bumpy made his phone call. "Mr. President," Bumpy said when Johnson answered the phone at 3:33 a.m. "I believe you have something that belongs to me. What are you talking about? Who is this?" "This is Bumpy Johnson. And what you have that belongs to me is justice for President Kennedy." Johnson was silent for a long moment. He knew who Bumpy Johnson was, knew his reputation, knew that he wasn't someone who made idle threats. "I don't know what you're implying, but I'm not implying anything, Mr. President. I'm stating a fact. You knew Kennedy was going to be killed in Dallas. You checked your watch at 12:29 p.m. because you were waiting for it to happen. And I have a photograph that proves it." Johnson's breathing became labored. "That's impossible." "Nothing's impossible when you have the right resources, Mr. President. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "What do you want?" "I want you to do what you should have done 5 years ago. I want you to tell the truth about what happened in Dallas. I want you to admit your role in President Kennedy's assassination. And I want you to resign from office." "I can't do that." "Even if what you're saying were true, which it's not. Resigning would destroy the Democratic Party and throw the country into chaos. Mr. President, the country is already in chaos. You've got a war in Vietnam that you can't win, riots in every major city, and Americans dying in the streets. How much worse can it get?" Johnson was quiet for several minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice was defeated. "What guarantee do I have that, if I resign, this information won't be made public anyway? You have my word, Mr. President. Resign from office, withdraw from the election, and the photograph stays buried forever. Continue trying to hold on to power, and by tomorrow evening every newspaper in America will have copies. I need time to think. You have 18 hours. Mr. President, your speech tonight can announce your re-election campaign, or it can announce your retirement. The choice is yours, but those are the only two options." At 9 p.m. on March 31, 1968, President Lyndon B. Johnson appeared on national television and shocked the nation with an announcement that no one had expected. "I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president." The speech was watched by 70 million Americans, making it one of the most viewed presidential addresses in history. Political analysts speculated about Johnson's reasons for withdrawing from the race, the Vietnam War. Declining poll numbers, family considerations. None of them suspected that the president had been forced to resign by a photograph taken by a sniper in Dallas 5 years earlier. Bumpy Johnson watched the speech from his office above Small's Paradise in Harlem. When Johnson finished speaking, Bumpy walked to his safe, removed the Rodriguez photograph, and burned it in an ashtray. Justice, Bumpy believed, didn't require public humiliation or criminal prosecution. Sometimes justice was simply ensuring that powerful people faced consequences for their actions, even if those consequences came years later and in forms they never expected. Tommy Rodriguez died in 1972, taking his Dallas secrets to the grave. Dorothy Williams moved to California and never spoke about the phone call she overheard in November 1963, and Lyndon Johnson spent his remaining years at his Texas ranch, knowing that somewhere in Harlem lived a man who could have destroyed his legacy, but chose instead to simply remove him from power. The photograph that could have rewritten American history was reduced to ashes in a Harlem nightclub, but its impact lasted forever. Johnson's withdrawal from the 1968 election changed the course of American politics, paving the way for Richard Nixon's presidency and everything that followed. On the night of March 31, 1968, 70 million Americans watched a president resign on television. Only one of them knew the real reason why. Bumpy Johnson had kept his promise to protect John F. Kennedy, even though he'd failed to save his life. And he'd kept his promise to make Lyndon Johnson pay for his complicity, even though it took 5 years to collect on the debt. Sometimes justice is swift and public. Sometimes it's slow and private. But if you're patient enough and powerful enough, justice always comes, even for presidents. The resignation speech that changed American history was delivered by a man who knew that somewhere in Harlem, someone was watching, someone was listening, and someone was finally satisfied that the debt had been paid in full